Okay, welcome back to the Magic Treehouse, Leprechaun in Late Winter. And again, if you have this book, you can follow along with me. And if you don't, use your listening ears. And remember that good readers, right, often visualize. They use the author's words to help them create pictures in their head, right? And then you kind of want to have a movie playing in your head. Think about the characters and what they're doing, um, the events that are occurring, make connections to the story, to your life, um, to the world, to things you've seen, to other stories that you've heard. Don't forget to make predictions, right? What you think is going to happen, and have I wonders. And again, we often have I wonders just naturally, and we often make predictions just naturally. So that's what you want to be doing as we're reading this story. So in chapter 1, we know that Jack and Annie, right, was off to Ireland. So to find a girl named Augusta. So chapter 2 is called The Big House. So we could have an I wonder of like, I wonder why it's called The Big House. You can make, well, I think this is why it's called The Big House. They talked about the big house. So this chapter is probably going to talk, have a lot to do with finding the big house. All right, so let's get started. A cold wind blew rain into the treehouse. Jack shivered. He was wearing an old overcoat and ragged trousers. Annie wore a scarf, a shawl, and a long red wool dress. They both wore scuffed, worn boots. "So, where are we?" said Jack. He and Annie looked out the window. The treehouse had landed in a tree at the edge of the green meadow, dotted with woolly white sheep. Okay, good visualization. Next to the meadow was a narrow lane. It ran uphill between low stone walls. Okay, it's a good picture to have in your head. Through the drizzle, Jack could see mist-covered mountains in the distance and a flash of silver sea. "It looks like a scene in a fairy tale," said Annie. "Yeah, a fairy tale with bad weather," said Jack. "I wonder where the big house is," said Annie. "I don't know, but I'd like to get inside it now," said Jack. "Me too," said Annie, shivering. "Let's go." And I'd have to have a connection. I don't like to be cold either, so I would want to be in the big house too. Jack crammed his cold hands into his pockets of his torn coat. In one pocket he felt his notebook and pencil. In the other he felt the Irish whistle. "I've got the whistle," he said. "Good," said Annie. She held her red skirt and started down the rope ladder. Jack climbed down after her. Annie pulled her shawl tightly around her shoulders. Jack turned up the collar of his coat. As they tramped through the wet meadows, he felt cold water seeping through the holes in his boots. Oh, I hate when my feet get cold. It's so hard to get warm again, right? And the author's given a very good description of what they're wearing, right? They're not looking their best. They've got wholly torn kind of coats. Oof, their boots, they're yuck. Jack and Annie climbed over a stone wall onto the muddy lane. A horse-drawn wagon was rattling toward them down the hill. The wagon was filled with squealing pigs. "Excuse me," Annie called to the driver. Can you tell us where the big house is?" An old man with a tired, rugged face pointed back up the hill. "Thanks," said Jack. The large wooden wheels of the wagon rumbled past, splashing Jack and Annie with mud. "Yuck," said Annie. "Now we're cold, wet, and dirty," said Jack. "Yeah, we're going to look great when we get to the big house," said Annie. "So what do we do when we get there?" asked Jack. So you could have some I wonders. I wonder what they're going to do. You can make some predictions. "When we find Augusta, maybe we'll tell her that Teddy and Kathleen sent us," said Annie, "like we told Louis Armstrong in New Orleans." Just thinking about their adventure with Louis Armstrong made Jack smile. I don't know if that will work," he said. "His world seems so different from this world. There it was so noisy and busy. Here it feels so lonely." "Well, We won't know until we find Augusta, said Annie. Let's go. Jack and Annie lowered their heads. They plodded up the lane, sloshing in and out of giant puddles. When they reached to the top of the hill, they stopped. The muddy lane wound down, past more sheep meadows and some cottages, past a long stable and several barns. At the end of the lane was a large open gate that led onto the grounds of a white mansion. Gray smoke rose from the mansion's chimneys. Good visualizing. The big house, said Annie. Maybe the people who live there will invite us inside to get warm and dry by a fire, said Jack. Jack and Annie started down a lane, so they're feeling hopeful right now. So I wonder if that's going to go how they're thinking. As they passed the sheep meadows, black and white dogs barked at them. When they walked by several boys hauling wet hay, the workers looked up and eyed them suspiciously. Jack was relieved to get to the gate and head toward the big house. When they reached the front door, Annie lifted the heavy knocker and let it drop. So can you picture that? You know, in the olden days when they had those knockers, right? Clink, clink, clink. A moment later, the door opened. A pale teenage girl looked out. Who are you? Why are you here? Oh, well, started Jack. Are you one of those the butler sent for? The girl asked. The butler? Said Jack. Yes, we are, said Annie. Then you should go round to the back, the girl said. Before Jack and Annie could ask for Augusta, the girl slammed the door in their faces. Nice, said Jack. Ooh, I hope she wasn't Augusta, said Annie. Why did you tell her yes? Asked Jack. It was a way to get inside the big house, said Annie. Come on. Jack and Annie tramped through the mud to the back of the mansion. They stopped at the door beneath the large smoking chimney. Annie knocked again. This time a young red-haired girl in a cap and apron opened the door. Yes, she said. Is your name? Started Annie. Who is it, Molly? Someone called from inside. Molly. Oh, so she's not Augusta, Jack thought. Who are you? Molly asked them. We're the ones the butler sent for, said Annie. You? Said Molly. She looked doubtful. Well, come on in and then see him then, okay? Jack and Annie stepped inside. Here, he's in the kitchen, said Molly, and she started down the hall. Jack and Annie followed Molly to the doorway of the dimly lit kitchen. The kitchen smelled of fish and onions. Pots and pans hung from a long rack over the big wooden table. A stout, older woman was bent over the table, rolling out dough. Cook, here are the ones the butler sent for, said Molly. The cook looked up from her dough and squinted at Jack and Annie. You're the ones he sent for? She said. Yes, ma'am. That's us, said Annie. The cook turned toward the fireplace. Next to a fire, an ancient-looking man with white whiskers sat slumped in the chair, snoring. Mr. O'Leary! The old man jerked and opened his eyes. The ones you sent for are here, the cook shouted as the man were hard of hearing. The groggy butler peered at Jack and Annie. I sent for you, he growled. Not possible. I sent for a coach driver and a blacksmith. Really? Said Annie. Oh, I guess there was a mistake. But maybe there's some jobs we could have you do around here. Well, what are you good for? Asked the butler. What do you mean? Said Jack. Well, do you know how to sweep the inside of a chimney? Said the old man. No, said Jack. How about pluck a chicken? The cook asked. No way, said Annie. What about rats? The butler said. What about them? Asked Jack. Well, they're all over the cellar, said the cook. Can you catch them? I don't think so, said Jack. Then you're no good to us here, snorted the butler. Be on your way. At that moment, Jack heard the back door open and shut. A girl about Jack's age stepped into the kitchen. She wore a red cape and carried two large empty baskets. That line right there kind of reminds me of maybe another character in a different story. I don't know, just a quick connection. Her wet hair was parted neatly down the middle and pulled it tight into a bun in the back. "Ah," said the cook, "welcome back, Miss Augusta." So they have met Miss Augusta, right? And so they described her as about Jack's age. She wore a red cape. She carried 2 large empty baskets. Her hair was wet, parted neatly in the middle, and pulled up tight into a bun. So can you visualize her? Right? And so what's the feeling you're getting about the story so far, right? Are Jack and Annie welcomed? How do the people, feel about them? And, I wonder if this is going to be an easy job for them, right? They're not used to the things back in those days, right? Things have changed so much in the world. So it's going to get interesting, I think. All right, that is the end of chapter 2. And thank you for listening. They used a lot of good vocabulary in here, so I'll probably put some posts up about the vocabulary words and what those meant. And you might want to draw, what you think the big house looks like and what you think some of the characters look like. Molly and the cook, the stout woman that was bent over the table, the butler. There's a few characters in here that were mentioned. So I will see you for chapter 3.